Please welcome Tim Krysiek, Managing Partner, Mass Mutual Climate Ventures, and Laura Metcalf, Managing Director, Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation.
Thank you. It's great to be here with all of you at Solve, my first time. And now we're going to speak about climate solutions.
And you've got it all figured out, right?
I've got it all figured out, but would love to hear what the audience thinks. No, in all seriousness, it's an incredibly important and timely problem, and we're eager to hear from the audience what you're working on, how we can help. So let's make this as interactive as possible. I think our job now is to tell you a bit about what we're doing in the space, how we're investing, how we think about the market. And so with that, Laura, I'll ask you what your thesis is on the space and how you're working the climate issue.
Great. Well, so happy to be here and really honored to be in a community of people like all of you in the audience that are spending every day trying to solve these really big problems facing our world. And it gives me hope when I get anxious and when the world feels like it's a little bit on fire. I just look at all the social entrepreneurs out there, trying to solve these big problems. So thank you. My name's Lara Metcalf. I'm a senior managing director at Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, DRK. We're a venture philanthropy organization, much like Casey was describing that MIT Solve has set up in the last few years. I actually sit on that investment committee as well. But DRK, for the last 22 years, has been looking for social entrepreneurs globally that are tackling some of the world's most pressing problems, whether it's in health, education, climate, agriculture. In the US, we do some democracy work, local journalism, et cetera. Today, we'll talk about the climate work, obviously. And I just think it's important to understand about DRK that our true north is really looking at the intersection of all of those issues I just named and vulnerable populations. I don't think I'm saying anything surprising when I say that as climate change hits, it's the most vulnerable populations that are going to bear the worst brunt of what's coming. And so we're really invested in trying to figure out how to mitigate those challenges for folks globally. About 50% of what we do is in the global south. We've been investing in Africa and India for the entirety of our existence. And so excited to talk a little bit more about some of what we've done there. But first, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Tim, on what you're working on.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I joined Mass Mutual Ventures. So I'm the managing partner of the Climate Technology Fund. And Mass Mutual has been doing direct venture investing for over a decade now, with over $1 billion committed to venture capital strategies. In late 2022, Mass Mutual Ventures announced the creation of a new fund, a climate-specific fund, and as I said, early 2023, I joined to co-lead that fund. So we're a financial investor, so we seek competitive financial returns relative to our asset class. And climate is so big, it's so broad. We have a $150 million early stage fund, and so we're focused on, we call them 3 swim lanes within climate. So first, we think a lot about what we call climate intelligence companies, companies that are leveraging big data on the natural world, on markets, and turning it into solutions to help address the climate crisis. Second, we think about a lot of time thinking about sustainable cities. Decarbonizing the built environment is so important. 30% of energy, 30% of carbon emissions roughly. That's a challenge that we have to tackle, and I think it's one that's coming into focus as regulation steps up. Local Law 97 in New York and similar laws throughout the country. There's going to be more and more focus on reporting and reducing emissions in the built environment. And then we want to be mindful of all of the climate issues, whether it's circular economy, urban EV charging. There's so much to do within cities, and we're still urbanizing as a globe. So solving those urban climate challenges, critically important. And then the third area that we focus on is clean power. So both new ways to generate power, more efficient ways to get it to people. That transmission and distribution bottleneck is real. It's slowing progress on decarbonizing the grid. And there's also a suite of technologies and business models around about electrifying demand. We can't forget about the demand side part of the equation. So those are the three areas where we spend most of our time.
And would you consider yourself kind of a hard tech or deep tech investor, or what's your split between hardware and software?
So I'm glad you asked. I think it's hard to be in climate tech without doing hardware. So we focus on both software and hardware, but mindful that there are a lot of business models in between. There's a lot of hybrid models out there, hardware-enabled software, certain marketplace models. I mean, there's a lot that can be done between those two poles.
I'm glad you said that, because I was just about to say there are lots of ways to do climate tech investing. Yep. And our way at DRK is very different, actually, and important. And I think when Tim and I were talking before, we realized what both of us is doing is important, and actually we need more people on both ends. What I mean by that is DRK is really, we're not investing in deep tech or frontier tech. We are not taking technology risk. What we're trying to do, though, often is taking well-known, well-understood, established technologies and bringing them into communities, or to help solve problems that these vulnerable communities globally are facing. And really, for us, we think about it more as implementation risk. So whether it's trying to solve energy poverty in Africa, we have organizations like Solar Sisters, who's been around for more than 10 years. They have 10,000 female entrepreneur, basically Avon ladies for solar products in rural Africa, and their products have touched 4 million people over the last 10 years. Or it could be including low-income communities in the energy transition here in the US, where right now we're about to make an investment in an organization that has figured out how to let renters in multifamily and affordable housing get the benefits of cheaper solar energy to reduce their utility bills. There's a mismatch. I call it a wrong pockets problem. The landlord doesn't want to spend the money to upgrade to these solar systems if they're not going to get the benefit. You had a better name for it. What do you call it?
Incentives.
Yeah, right. The
we
mismatch.
Just call it the incentives, or the split incentives
The
problem.
split incentives problem, right. So the split incentive. So organizations like that, or it could be just last mile access of different sorts. We also are doing some nature-based solutions. We're working with fisher folk to try to make sure that they can maintain their livelihoods as temperatures warm. Keep It Cool is an organization we've done work with in Africa that provides coal storage and transportation. So I guess my thought would be, we need folks like you spending money on this really critical, innovative sequestration, et cetera. And you need folks like us who are going to make sure that every single person on this planet benefits from the technology we have and avoids the worst harm that's coming with climate change.
So I'm curious, take me inside your investment committee, inside your IC. Within your thesis, you're dealing with a variety of different cases. How do you measure the ecological impact, the social impact? What are the metrics or the tools that you use to quantify that impact when you make a decision?
That's such a good question. Because we are investing across so many issue areas, we made a decision long ago that we would measure total lives impacted as the single metric we report on, but we really encourage our portfolio to report on kind of standard, recognized, research-based metrics. And so, for DRK as a whole, we've touched 400, we've had a direct impact on 400 million lives over the last 22 years. And I shouldn't say, I don't claim that impact. Our portfolio has touched that many people. In the climate space, our numbers are much smaller because we're newer in climate. We've had impact on 30 million lives over the last 7 or 8 years and removed 15 metric tons of carbon, or, through the portfolio.
That's great.
But it's, for us as a venture philanthropy organization, absolutely impact is often the first thing we talk about. Is it a big enough problem? Is it a vulnerable population? And is this solution innovative? And can it scale? Because the DRK model is one of a small cash investment 3 years of a board member. So we take a board seat in every single situation. We act as an operating partner, so right there in the trenches, weekly, bi-weekly calls with the CEO helping solve things. And then a community of 240 amazing entrepreneurs, some of whom are here today, which is wonderful to see. MIT Solve has been a great partner.
That's great.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more, like, what are the biggest challenges you face when you're trying to, go after whatever's going to be the most, highest commercial return, but also best impact on climate?
Yeah, there are so many challenges. I mean, first and foremost, we look for founders who are really always in learning mode. They want to make the most of their board. They want to make the most of their investor community. That's really important to us, to find those curious, nimble founders who see the problem, who can describe the problem clearly, and work from that basis. We think back to the hardware-software dichotomy. I think recognizing there's a lot in between, but I think with software-focused companies, we're trying to help them on that journey from the first $1 million of recurring revenue to $5 million of recurring revenue, right? With the hardware companies, I think it's more we're taking them from late bench stage science or perhaps early commercial deployments. We'll say we'll go pre-revenue on the hardware side, but not pre-product. We do like to see at least a pilot project out there collecting real-world data. On the hardware side, we try to take the companies from that stage through a thoughtful IP strategy development, thinking about the optimal use of patents and know-how, and approaching that contract manufacturing stage as they start to scale up commercially. And one of the exciting things about the MassMutual platform, very large asset manager and financial organization, of course, but one of the challenges, I think, for climate tech entrepreneurs is finding that full climate capital stack. Right?
Absolutely.
Marrying non-dilutive funding, which is so important and a great proof point when you approach financial investors, with early stage venture and then growth, and in some cases, especially on the hardware side, infrastructure debt, appropriate use of venture debt, perhaps equipment-based lending facilities. There's so many things to take advantage of. Fortunately, within MassMutual and Barings, our wholly owned subsidiary, there are a lot of asset managers that have a piece of their strategy that's focused around sustainability or net zero, and they have those different flavors of capital to help entrepreneurs as they scale. So we hope we're the first check, but hopefully not the last check, as we could introduce entrepreneurs to that ecosystem.
That's really great. And I want to ask you another quick question, but I also want to encourage the audience. In a couple minutes, we are going to open it up if people have questions. And so I feel like we just heard you can be pre-revenue, not pre-product. So I feel like that's a rare breed.
Yep.
So, but if you have questions about anything, in the foundation, venture philanthropy, VC world, please get them ready. And I guess do you think any of your organizations will end up, or your companies will end up needing project finance?
Oh, I think certainly. So this fund's a bit early. We launched last year, or closed the fund last year. But certainly in my previous fund at Equinor Ventures, we had multiple companies that were trying to take advantage of project finance because they were dealing with that first-of-a-kind project issue, right? You've got a new electrolyzer, you're building a fusion project for the first time. Like, what is the optimal way to finance that? How do you blend those different types of finance? And I think, putting myself in the entrepreneur's shoes for a minute, what sort of business development negotiation do I have to make with counterparties who might be willing to take some equity exposure, but also are interested in project level risk? So I think there's definitely a place for it in the hard tech, deep tech climate space.
Absolutely. Do you want to spend a moment talking about opportunities? We can both chime in.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have you start about
Sure.
What are you excited about?
Well, there's so many things to get excited about. I think one area that we've got to take really seriously, and it's at the top of the hype curve right now, data centers, emission from data centers.
Totally.
The growth of AI is going to be a profound climate challenge. If you look at some of the studies around the energy consumption and therefore the carbon emissions, the GHG emissions attributable to the growth of data centers, at the same time, AI could be such a powerful tool to help us identify new climate solutions. One that I see a lot of buzz about is the optimal matching for battery chemistry problems, really designing the next level of batteries. You see a bit of that in terms of material science for low carbon or sustainable building products. So there's so much on both sides of the coin. The other area that I think we cannot focus on enough is the area around HVAC and air purification. I mean, if you were in the Northeast last summer, I'll never forget, I was in Brooklyn on the day when the Canadian wildfires reached their peak. The sky was orange. It was a struggle to breathe. And you know, for those of you who have worked in emerging economies, you know, that's probably not the first time that you've had that sensation. So I think the cognitive limits that humans experience when you get over 600 parts per million, that's real, and that's going to be an increasing issue for commercial real estate, for anybody who's worried about managing their energy efficiency footprint within a building. HVAC is always number one on the tornado chart. So those are two areas where we need lots of innovation.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, we are seeing AI in climate in some of our portfolio as well. We invested in a company called Cloud to Street, now known as Floodbase, that's using satellite imagery in low resource areas as a facilitation for those people to be able to buy parametric insurance, which people might know about. But on top of the satellite imagery, they're using AI to kind of really be able to focus down more and make uninsurable places insurable. So I think we are seeing it, and we'll see more of it. But you're right; it's this like I wish crypto never happened because that uses so much data too. And
I think it's funny you brought up climate insurance before I did. So to be clear, MassMutual focuses on life insurance, but I agree wholeheartedly. There are so many problems to solve with respect to climate insurance. Obviously, the physical risk, but also the transition risk in the sense that there are all these new products to insure. Right. So what is the business interruption risks, or what is the commercial insurance solution for first of a kind infrastructure?
Right. Totally. I think another area I'm really excited about is the overlap between workforce and the energy transition and green jobs. And I think we're seeing more and more there because if you're talking about any coastal area, we're going to see the removal of impermeable landscapes, right? We have to make significant changes in landscapes, in building, in the built environment. And so I think we're really excited as we start to see more and more of the kind of green job corps types of interventions, and really think there'll be some great opportunities there as well. Now, I can't see if there's anybody in line. I don't think there is. Oh, wait.
Right.
I'd invite you to introduce yourself and ask a question that ends with a question mark.
That sounds good. My name is Sergio Figueroa. Thank you very much for the conversation. I guess like you, I'm very involved in the product finance space. I'm part of the First Citizens Bank team, Silicon Valley Bank team, been doing this for 25 years. I'm really curious about, you were hitting on the thesis, and very interesting on hearing your thoughts around complementarity between software and hardware. And as we know, the U.S. is becoming more and more inward-looking with regards to trade policy, and part of the growth that has happened over the last several years, couple of decades, one could argue, with regards to facilitating cost decrease at an accelerated pace for mostly climate tech solutions, has been driven by having the ability to interact with countries like China, some other manufacturing centers. What's your institutional view of that? Because I'm sure that part of how you're thinking about where you're deploying capital has a lot to do with how you assume the cost curve will look like and its ability to scale accordingly. Just very interesting in hearing your thoughts institutionally, how you're tackling that. Thank you.
Yes. So if I understood the question correctly, what's the interplay between trade policy and the loop of importing finished products from China, installing them in the U.S. to further the energy transition?
Correct.
Yeah. Lots I could say on that. I think one of the areas that we're thinking about is with respect to soft costs in solar and infrastructure development, right? So the new announcements that were made around the Biden administration's decision to extend some of the Trump era tariffs on solar. We think about that a lot. What is that going to mean for the soft costs of implementing these projects? One of the areas that we see is really critical to solve that is, I mentioned the transmission and distribution bottlenecks, right? There's a whole movement toward reconductoring to making the existing grid corridors more efficient. The other issue is a very local issue, and that comes down to permitting at a local level. So we've seen a cluster of companies using large language models to try to enhance permitting efforts, to expedite those permitting efforts so that we can get the green grid faster. With respect to the trade balance, I'd have to think a little bit more about that, but of course one of the things that we always watch closely, because it flows through certainly the mobility sector and also parts of the power sector, is the cost of storage, right? How is that going to be impacted? How soon can the US gigafactories get up and running, or are we going to see a bit of an air pocket as we transition the supply?
So I encourage you to find him later and
Yeah,
ask more.
I'll be at lunch.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. My name is Stephanie Joseph, and I'm the co-founder of Kura. We are a blockchain-based fintech accelerating financial inclusion in the global south. Larry mentioned that you're not really focusing on deep tech, but you're focusing on mostly established technologies that can accelerate like climate change in different markets. So for example, what is your recommendation for early stage founders that are building, let's say, blockchain-based solution for climate and insurance and markets that have been deemed a little bit riskier? What metrics are you looking to see? Because there's going to be maybe a long life cycle rather in terms of like implementing blockchain-based insurance, for example, in places like the Caribbean. What metrics would you look at for early stage founders that are building in the space?
Quickly, I guess a couple things that come to mind is kind of knowing exactly who your target market is, what the problem you're trying to solve, what's the value you're going to bring. I will admit, with any blockchain-based solution, I always want to understand, is the blockchain really critical to the impact we're trying to have here, or to the value of the product? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, I'll be honest, with what we see. Because again, blockchain has significant energy costs, so I think it's great for some problems, but we want to make sure that the solution meets the problem. I'm happy to talk to you more afterwards if you want, because I think we're receiving the wind it down, dimming of the lights. So I'm going to say, will you join me in thanking Tim for sharing all of his insights today?
Yeah, and the same to you. Thank you.
All right.